So I want to welcome our panelists and just to get a sense of the expertise that we're bringing to bear. And I want to thank Megan Morrow from our team. She runs our Tech Means Business platform, which now has an AI subcommittee. So what we're talking about today is going to be very important to our work going forward. So we're going to jump right in. Mr. Chairman, we just learned Texas has added the most IT jobs of any state in 22. We're number 2 overall in IT jobs behind California, number 1 in tech exports, and we were just named the best business climate in the nation by Site Selection magazine. What could AI mean to new data centers, startups, and general IT investment in the state of Texas?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me here. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons you just mentioned, and every single one says Texas is number 1. And we're number 1 for a lot of reasons, right? I mean, we have been able to draw talent from all over the world over the last decade or more, especially when it comes to technology. I used to live in California, and I remember the very first tall building I saw was Oracle's headquarters. Well, they're here now. And we would hear about HP and how they developed all their stuff in their garage, and they're here in Texas now too. And so it's, in a way, feeding on itself here in Texas. I would say it's partly because of good governance, good regulations, lower taxes, all of that. But what we've seen as well is that we have a lot of skilled individuals here in the state of Texas who want to work on technology. Silicon Valley, still Silicon Valley, but I think Texas is growing by leaps and bounds. We have data centers everywhere. Artificial intelligence and all of the use cases for it will only continue to grow the need for people to be right here in Texas. And you just see it popping up everywhere. Now, just like having whatever it is, 1,100 people a day moving to Texas, we have to make sure that our infrastructure is there to handle all of this new things. That's water, that's electricity, and that's workforce. So I'm excited seeing all of this happening here. We're competing with other states too, but I think, like you said, we're number 1 in everything, so we should win this too.
Number 1 in everything, and we'll be number 1 in football too. Ryan, as I was mentioning, the news is full of stories about AI. Could you maybe just give us a little primer for those with just human intelligence? What is generative AI? What's all the buzz about? And just how would you frame the promises and the challenges?
Sure. So first, thank you to the Texas Association of Business for having me. I just flew down on a flight from Seattle, and I was reluctant to admit this coming in. I thought I might be in hostile territory, but I am a Husky, I have to admit. So go Huskies, just saying. But in any event, you know, we at Microsoft are extremely excited and optimistic about the range of benefits that this new wave of technologies could provide across society, to businesses, to people. But there is still a lot of confusion about what is AI? What is this thing? And why are we hearing so much about it now? And in part, that confusion stems from the fact that the term AI has become something of a marketing term. It's been thrown around for decades. And it's been used to refer to anything that could be automated. So when banks started coming out with ATMs in the 70s, that was called AI. Checkouts, cashless checkouts, it can be referred to as AI. Spell checkers and autocomplete programs and search engines can all be referred to as AI. But what we're really talking about now, and what is driving so much of the media coverage, is the creation of new, sophisticated, and increasingly powerful large language models. Models like GPT-4. If anyone has used ChatGPT, which has been produced by a company called OpenAI. What are these things? What these models essentially do is math. They are trained on internet-sized data sets, And they are capable of identifying patterns and correlations across data sets over time, and it getting better at doing that. Have you heard of machine learning? That is the learning in machine learning. Programs that can get better at identifying and calculating probabilities, conclusions from large data sets over time. And so large language models are capable, after being trained on extremely large data sets, of getting better at determining, for instance, if you had a sentence, I woke up this morning and there was a beautiful blue blank. What should the next word be? Sky, bird, butterfly, something else. A large language model can determine and calculate the probability as to what that next word in that sentence would be. Once you can do that, you can start to say, what might the next sentence look like? Or what might a paragraph look like? Or what might 2 paragraphs or a short story, etc. So they can start to generate their own content, and that is the generative in gen or generative AI. And as we've seen, these models can be very powerful. And there are all sorts of anecdotes in the media to illustrate this. My favorite, since I was once a young aspiring lawyer, is that apparently GPT-4 can pass the bar exam in the 90th percentile. And if you had told me as a law student ahead of time, we can guarantee you will pass the bar exam in the 90th percentile, I would have signed right up for that. But it's also important, particularly when we're talking about what are the proposed benefits and what are the potential range of harms we might be concerned with, to keep in mind what these models can and cannot do. They still cannot provide causal explanations of things. There are certain things that humans are capable of doing that these models cannot. But there are certain things that they are really, really good at, and the way we at Microsoft tend to think about them is how can we put this technology in the hands of everybody to augment what we already do, to improve and make more efficient what we already do. And we're very excited about the prospect of doing that.
Ryan, thank you. And that was very courageous of you to make that football comment. And you're going to be wrong. So, and that doesn't take IE to figure that out, AI. Saurabh, there's a line that sticks out in McKinsey's generative AI report that you authored. The future of work is already here, and it's moving fast. And later in the day, we're going to have a great workforce panel. How do you think AI will impact the demand and the skill set needed for labor now and in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question and difficult to answer in a short period of time. But one of the things that we did was we literally looked at every single BLS occupation. And for every single occupation, we mapped it down to an activity level. And then for every activity, we looked at what's technology's ability to do that task compared to human performance. And we had done this exercise in about 2014, 2015. And then we refreshed it over the last year or two as everyone got incredibly excited about AI and generative AI. And what we found was quite exciting, where almost every job and every role could be impacted by generative AI. But the total number that we found was, and we modeled various scenarios, but in our midpoint scenario, what we found was that about 30% of activities could be automated. And when you think about that 30%, 20% of that was coming from all other technologies and other factors. 10% of that was coming from kind of the new advancement. And so punchline number one that we saw was that it was sort of what Ryan was talking about, where it's really a story about job augmentation rather than job replacement, where for most occupations, this is about superpowering marketing and sales, superpowering what you could do in your software engineering organization, superpowering what you could do in customer service. but not changing the unique human things that still are going to be required for the vast majority of occupations. Having said that, we also did see that there are certain job categories that are going to be disproportionately impacted. And so we do need to think not only about sort of the positive attributes, but also how do we really help people transition from certain occupations to growing occupations? And in particular, how do we support low-wage workers? How do we support underserved populations that are away from some of these tech hubs? And how do we do that effectively and at scale? And what was exciting is over the last 3 years nationally, we've actually seen this done at a greater scale than we've seen previously. And this state and the city is a great example of a vibrant economy that's sort of doing this at scale, and what we want to see moving forward as well. And then the last thing that I would kind of call out is, in terms of what does that mean for the individual, the way that we think about it is we need to be teaching our kids IQ, EQ, and AQ. What do I mean by that? IQ, we still need all of our kids to have foundational skills in numeracy and literacy, and then to have the technical skills of whatever occupation they want to pursue. And so that's going to be the first thing that any employer looks at, is do they have the skills to be able to do this job and the foundational skills to do it well. But on top of that, the EQ layer is going to be more important than ever. And that EQ layer is the critical thinking, the ability to collaborate, the ability to communicate, and all the things that are uniquely human and are currently not able to be done by even the most profound large language models that we've been seeing. And then finally, we have this AQ layer. And I think that's really important. And what we mean by AQ is adaptability, where these models are changing rapidly. And so even when we start to do some of these analyses, we have to be very humble in the fact that there's a lot that we don't know and a lot that's going to be unpredictable. But what we do know is that change is coming, and change is coming quite quickly. And so we need to make sure that every individual is prepared to be adaptable, because it's highly likely that their career is going to be changing at a much faster pace than they expect.
Great information. And Rebecca, we hear a lot about the variety of concerns relating to AI. I'll ask, for what you're optimistic about, but I'd also like to hear, because I know that Amazon's been a leader in responsible AI, for the things that companies are doing, the private sector are doing, to make sure that AI moves forward responsibly.
Great, thank you so much. I love everything that's been said here so far. Absolutely co-sign everything that's been said, and it's a wonderful way to kick us off. I'm optimistic about so many things around AI. It impacts our daily lives. Even before this generative AI wave, we all check weather on our phone. We all have some sort of device in our house that helps us maybe order a couple of things off the internet, perhaps. This is AI. This is artificial intelligence. It's already happening. AI made my jeans. I ordered these jeans from a website. I just answered a few questions, and they sent me a pair of jeans that fit me perfectly. So AI is already a huge part of our daily lives. So I'm optimistic about everything that we've just heard, right? It's augmenting human capability. At Amazon, we are ensuring that we democratize AI, and we're giving tools to be able to create these websites, to create apps by just asking a question. And this is so different from the way we've interacted with technology before. So when ChatGPT came live on our cell phones, we had probably the most powerful technology of a generation available on this tiny little device in front of us. That's never happened before. You can ask these questions in a human understandable language. It's going to put me out of business, because that's what I do. I teach technology people how to speak in a human understandable way, and it's happening with natural language processing. Now, some of the things we're worried about, of course, is these large models with billions of parameters. This is a huge jump in the amount of parameters that are in a traditional machine learning or AI model. the possibility to reflect the biases that are in our data, because if you don't know this already, I hate to break it to you, a lot of the data that we use in our daily lives, the financial data, housing data, there is inherent bias in the data. So it's on us, both from a technology perspective in our companies and on you as a consumer of these technologies, to ask some hard questions, right? I loved what Saurabh said about all of the different intelligences we're going to need, and this is a key part of it, is understanding how the technology is going to impact your life and asking the hard questions. If you're a company thinking about starting to do generative AI, look at your foundation models. See what data they're trained on. Are they ensuring that intellectual property is respected? Are they not just combing the entire internet to pull in any piece of data? Because this is what we need to be asking questions about. It's kind of a shared responsibility. We talk about that a lot at Amazon and at AWS, is we have a shared responsibility together to ensure that the technology is working the way we want it to, and asking those questions is a great place to start. And finally, I will make a pitch for what I say about responsible AI, which I think is, I try not to get into the weeds around definite technologies, but it needs to be human-centered development. Every development that you do needs to have your customer, your employee, your citizenry, your constituency at the center of that development. There needs to be humans checking the outcomes. There needs to be humans checking the inputs. This is not, unfortunately, a set and forget type of technology. We need to be watching the outcomes and ensuring that we're getting what we want from the technology. So as much as it is a technology-created issue, it's a human-centered issue. And really, I always say we can't use technology to solve a technology problem. We must insist that we as humans and the people that will benefit from this technology are at the center of the development. And that's basically the advice we give our customers as we're working with them at the Innovation Center for Generative AI, to talk about what their values are and what their organizational values are, so we can ensure the technology you're developing is in alignment with what your customers expect and what your citizens expect.
Rebecca, thank you. Ryan, I would love your thoughts. Obviously, OpenAI and the relationship with Microsoft, there's a lot of discussion about the power of these models. Would love your thoughts on what the private sector needs to do to make sure that this technology could be used for good and not get out there and do things that we would all not like to see in this room.
Sure, because look, while we certainly are optimistic and very bullish about the prospects of this technology to provide all sorts of benefits to people, we're also very clear-eyed that there are real risks of harm. And we at Microsoft have been thinking hard for some time about those risks and about what we can do to help mitigate them. 6 years ago, our CEO, Satya Nadella, wrote an article in which he outlined 6 ethical principles that, in his view, ought to govern the development and deployment and use of AI technologies. We subsequently, as a company, adopted those principles, and they include things like fairness, ensuring that these sorts of technologies will treat similarly situated people the same and won't otherwise create risks of unlawful bias and discrimination, particularly if they're going to be used to make important decisions about people's lives, whether to provide them with insurance, credit, housing, education, etc. Privacy and security, ensuring that these kinds of models will be developed and used in ways that comply with existing laws to protect our privacy and protect the security of our information. Safety, ensuring that these sorts of technology will be safe, particularly if they're going to be used and deployed in scenarios in which they could cause real harms to people. Think autonomous vehicles, among other things. So since then, we have been building out a lot of infrastructure in the company to make those principles real. We have created an Office of Responsible AI. It is a team that is headed by a chief responsible AI officer, think akin to a chief privacy officer. And their job, among other things, is to take those ethical principles and turn them into engineering rules, responsible AI standard. These are rules that are intended to make those principles concrete and practical so that our engineering teams, when they are developing and building new technologies, are required to consider those principles from the ground up. They inform the way we design our technologies, and so they're not just an afterthought. We created an ethics committee at the company, something which we were calling the Ether Committee. Now we are calling our Responsible AI Council. It consists of the senior-most leaders from across the company, and their job is governance, to ensure that everything we do each day abides by and is consistent with those ethical principles. This is a council that, in fact, has turned down business over the years when we've been presented with proposals to implement AI technologies like facial recognition technology in circumstances or scenarios where we thought it would be unsafe or unethical. So we have made a lot of those principles our responsible AI standard, our ethical principles, among other things, public, because we would like to encourage other institutions to do more to ensure that when they develop and deploy and use AI technologies, it will be done responsibly, ethically, and safely. But we also think there's a need to do more. And there is a very robust conversation happening amongst policymakers across the United States and frankly around the world about what the rules should look like, both to facilitate the benefits that this technology could provide while also addressing real risks of harm. And we look forward to continuing to participate in those conversations as the discussion unfolds.
Yeah, I know that there was a big conference in the UK a few weeks ago. And I'm going to get to the chairman in a moment on the legislative side, but Saurabh, when I read the report, there's few things that I've read in the last few years that suggest that if done the right way, this could have a massive positive impact on world GDP. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect and what that could mean if we drill it down to the average person here in Texas and the United States?
Yeah, happy to comment on that. So as we looked at this and we looked globally, one of the things that we've seen is that productivity generally has stalled. That's largely driven by our global demographic trends as we think about most developed economies having slowing population growth and in some cases declining population growth. And as we explored the sort of economic potential of AI and generative AI specifically, there's huge opportunity, as the other panelists have talked about, for real productivity gains, or in easier language, just the ability for individuals to do far more than they're currently doing. And so one of my favorite examples to do is actually to go to a sector that I work a lot in when we think about teachers. And so if you think about teachers are some of our most overworked people in the labor force. On average, globally, teachers work about 50 to 60 hours. And when you look at the actual activities of where they're spending time, unfortunately, they're not able to spend a whole lot of time directly in student interactions. And they're spending a bunch of their time on administrative tasks, on grading, on a lot of bureaucratic processes. And so when we talk about this superpowering, what we're talking about is how do you help a teacher save 20 to 30% of their time to then take that and actually directly interact with students who are in need and improve student outcomes. And you take that analogy to every other kind of profession, and that's what we mean by sort of superpowering the economy, where now you have that same labor force, but you don't have to rely on population growth. You're superpowering each of those folks with, let's say, 20 to 30% productivity. And when you add that up, when we've looked at various scenarios, that could actually lead to, over the next decade, trillions of productivity growth. And so when we think about the business implications of this, you absolutely need to lean in. And the way that we've been talking to businesses about it is you need to figure out what's your offensive strategy. Because if you don't figure out how to get that productivity gains, your competitors are going to do so. But at the same time, as folks have talked about, you also need to play defense, because there are some profound risks when you start thinking about your IP, as well as other things and bad actors and whatnot. And so like any good football team, you need to be thinking about both the offense and the defense.
I understand that. Mr. Chairman, heard some of this conversation. As I said, you've been the leader in privacy legislation. Do you have, and I know that the legislature passed an AI commission this past regular session, do you have legislation in mind or even drafted that could affect this area?
We're going to ban AI, I think. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. We've been working on various bits of technology over the years, but as a lawmaker, kind of one of our jobs is protect individuals' rights and their liberties and their freedoms. I mean, that's what our goal is, right? To defend the Constitution and the citizens, but still, in this case, make sure that people can innovate and have the freedom, but create these guardrails around it. If you think about it in the terms of driving, right? We want people to be able to go wherever they want. We just want them to do it at less than 100 miles an hour. We want people to be able to have a job and make money, but we just don't think you should steal from other people, right? So our job as lawmakers is to go and think about how we can protect while still allow this innovation and this technology to happen here in Texas. The issue, though, is this is a little bit of a brave new world, right? What is this going to do, and how is it going to affect people? And I think in some ways we look at it as it already is affecting people. I think about the fact that everybody here has obviously a cell phone. The average person is using their cell phone. If you get your little update Sunday mornings, you're probably using it 40 to 50 hours a week. Your kids are using it 40 to 50 hours a week. You got here maybe using a map system, and you just followed it blindly. It said turn left, you turn left. You turn right, right. Think of all the liberty you had doing that. There's so much content right now on this planet. Anybody can say anything and do anything, write an article, what have you. But when you read the news, you're seeing what was tailor-made for you. When you pick up your phone in the morning and you see what was being said, that was just for you. And that helps drive a lot of your decisions and a lot of your thoughts and even your conversations for the rest of the day. And we've seen risks in how that's done, whether that's misinformation and disinformation in political campaigns. We've seen groups of people completely misinterpret what's going on in world events and find each other and possibly cause not only these groups, rabid groups to be formed, but also come to wrong decisions. And so when we think about this, we have to look at what has been thought about in the past, whether it's philosophical, ethical, other laws that have been created. Because in a lot of cases, we already have laws. You can't discriminate, okay? You have to hire a certain way. You have to have certain reviews. You have to be licensed to do certain things. But in other times, we have to look at kind of the people who predicted this was all going to happen a long time ago, right? The Orwells of the world and the Huxleys of the world, or even the Isaac Asimovs of the world, who a long time ago thought, hey, what happens if someday there's artificial intelligence? What are the rules we're going to go by? They didn't think of the 6 ethical laws, but he had 3 laws. Number 1, robots shall not harm humans. And that's kind of the conversation we're having today. Hey, you know what? We're going to make sure that it's not biased, it doesn't make mistakes, it doesn't drive you off a cliff if you are using the autonomous vehicles. Those are obvious. Second law that he thought was, okay, you need to be able to make sure that the robots do what you tell it to do, right? So when I tell you to give me information, give me the information that I want. Don't start coming up with your own ideas about what it should be. And then third law was, should protect itself, which we do through cybersecurity, data management, all of that. Where I am, and I think we're all going to end up getting to, because we can all pass a law on risks and stuff, lawn sprinklers are not important, electric grid is, that kind of stuff. He came back and he created the 0th law, right? He's like, well, even before 1, we're going to come up with a new law. And what it did is it says robots or artificial intelligence should not harm humanity. And I think that's kind of where we're looking at this, is what can we put in place today to make sure that everyone can go and help their back-end processes and make people more efficient and find the information they want when they need it, but at the same time, be able to make sure that we as Texans are able to do what we want to do when we want to do it and not fall trap to some of these terrible decisions. We're looking at omnibus bill to go and create a framework for how Texas and its government agencies should be able to procure this stuff and be able to analyze it, have audits and transparency. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of single-shot bills that talk about political misinformation and disinformation and licensing in workforce. It's really exciting as a lawmaker to be working on this kind of stuff, and I think the good news is we have about 10 months to get it done. Thank you.
Yes, there's been 4 special sessions for those keeping score at home. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your thoughtful answer and for being here, given all the legislative work. I wanted to ask Ryan and Rebecca just how, on the advocacy side, we should be thinking. You know, there's always sort of that desire, if you could have a national, federal standard in different areas, that would be attractive, but that's not going to happen anytime soon. How should we be thinking about going forward with legislation in this very fast-moving area?
Great. I'm happy to start. So first of all, we really appreciate the thoughtful approach and the stakeholder approach that Representative Capriglione has done in his work on privacy, and we see that as a great model of where to begin. To Representative Capriglione's points, there are already so many laws on the books that do manage a lot of the issues that are around AI. We would love to ensure that as we are looking at the responsible ways to implement this technology, that our lawmakers look at the alignment of how the technology is going to help the citizens that they serve and ensure that the laws are in alignment with those legislative priorities and include a lot of stakeholders around the table, because just as I mentioned earlier, where we are responsible for understanding how the technology impacts us and how we can ask for better and how to ensure that the technology does not harm or cause any additional biases out into our communities. We feel like having these stakeholders at the table is very important. Businesses are all going to be impacted by these laws as well as the technology, so having a seat at the table and ensuring that your views are heard is super important, part of the democratic process, and this is what we hope we will be able to do, is to bring everyone to the table and ensure that we get the best outcomes for all of us, because whether we like it or not, this technology is going to impact every single one of us.
Thank you.
So I think the first thing we say to policymakers when they are considering this topic is, have you passed a comprehensive privacy law? AI relies upon lots and lots of data. Privacy is rules about data. You can't have responsible and ethical AI without rules about data. And so we would applaud Representative Capriglione and his colleagues for passing a comprehensive privacy law this past year and making Texas now one of 13 states to pass a comprehensive privacy law. We would love to see Congress do something in that space. We've been calling for Congress to do that since 2005. We're still waiting. But we've been heartened to see the states start to act and to do so in a way that is more or less uniform or at least consistent with one another. I think most policymakers, from my perspective, are still grappling with what is this thing? What is AI, and specifically, what are the types of technologies within the sort of broad umbrella of AI that we should be concerned about and that we should be encouraged by? And therefore, what are the rules that ought to be put in place in order to facilitate the benefits and address the risks of harm. And so we've seen a number of policymakers across the country, at least 5 governors' administrations now have issued executive orders directing their departments to conduct landscape analysis, to be crystal clear about what are the risks of harm and what are the benefits. What are the existing laws on the books that would and should apply to the use of AI? Like, for example, it was alluded to earlier, we've had discrimination laws on the books for decades. Those laws can and should and will continue to apply if AI is used in order to make consequential decisions about people, whether to provide them with insurance, credit, housing, etc. We have consumer protection laws that are on the books. Laws like every state has a UDAP statute, prohibits unfair deceptive trade practices. How would that apply to AI? And then frankly, where are there gaps? Gaps that policymakers need to fill. We also think it's very important for policymakers when they're considering what should the new rules look like, to consider the technical architecture that undergirds the creation of foundational, highly capable large language models, because there are different components of the technological stack, and it may be the case that different rules would be more appropriate to different parts of the stack. I'll give you an example. At the bottom of the stack is the infrastructure that is required to train large language models. So we at Microsoft created a supercomputing data center outside Des Moines in Iowa solely to train OpenAI's models. It is a massive place. It has over 285,000 central processing units, over 10,000 advanced graphics processing units. Each of those has just insane connectivity, 400 gigabits per second. And it may be that the government and the public want and need assurance about who is building that infrastructure and then who is building the models relying upon that infrastructure. How can we have assurances that the people building those know who they're building them for and that we're not building them for a foreign adversary or a terrorist actor to do something like build a dirty bomb or build a bioweapon, etc. So there are conversations happening at the federal level about whether there should be some sort of licensing regime for those 2 layers of the stack. In contrast, at the top of the stack, you have the application layer, and that is the layer where most members of the public, government, businesses, etc., will interact with this technology. If anyone's used the new Bing, because we Bing in our house, we don't Google, I'm just saying. Or ChatGPT, those are applications that can utilize the capabilities of a large language or foundational model, and that is where most of the discussions at the state level and other places have been occurring, and we think that's appropriate because that is where most of the risks of harm to the public could arise.
We only have a few minutes, but
Can
yeah,
I make one
I
more
want
quick
yeah,
point?
please.
I would love for us to understand how we can partner with our representatives and our businesses to ensure that we're working in partnership. We have so much content about what this technology is, how to use it, to really get to understand this technology on your own, to dig into the technology. We have something called Party Rock right now. I did not name it. And you can actually go in and use our models and ask it to do anything, to build you an app, to do things, and it teaches you how to use the technology. So there's such an opportunity for even our local chambers to work with us and to partner with us to take this content that we have free and available online to give to your members, to give to anyone that is interested in the technology. So I just wanted to make sure we got that point across, that there's so many free resources out there to learn, and they're all available on all of our respective websites. So thanks.
Those are important points. We only have a couple minutes, but I wanted to ask, since we're optimistic and we have a Chamber of Commerce weather day and we're in the best state in the country for business, all due respect, Mike Bailey, our good friend from the Arizona Chambers, joined us here today. Number 2 isn't bad. Is that, what's the best case? We have these great challenges when it comes to healthcare. I was at a panel in Mexico City where there was a representative for Pfizer talking about how AI is speeding up clinical trials, for example. We talk about energy challenges, infrastructure challenges. The chairman mentioned we're adding on net 1,100 people a day in the state of Texas. How can AI help with this? And is this, when you think about all the different things that have happened over the last 200 or 300 years, isn't this possibly the biggest thing in our lifetimes, and in terms of doing some good things to solve some of these challenges? And since I'm going to go McKinsey because you guys do great work on infrastructure, healthcare. I name the subject, so.
So it's always hard to calibrate. Is this the biggest thing, right? And we all have recency bias, and so I don't know if it's the biggest, but it's definitely a huge thing, right? And one of the things that we studied is it's not the fact that it's just the technological revolution that's happening. It's the fact that that's happening at the same time where we see a labor market that we haven't seen before, where we see demographic trends that we haven't seen before, where we see some of these grand challenges that you were alluding to, and various federal investments that are at a scale that we haven't seen before. And so when you combine all those things together, it's clearly not an ordinary disruption. And in terms of, when we think the path forward, you can pick any of these grand challenges, and there are plenty of use cases of how these technologies can be applied to that. When we think about healthcare, there are all kinds of opportunities around accelerating clinical trials. We're already seeing new breakthrough discoveries and the ability for universities to use these things responsibly to actually accelerate and get more from what they've been researching for years. When we think about infrastructure investments, there are massive opportunities there, right? And so when I look at the opportunities, there's not a sector where we've not been able to find 10 use cases where some of the technologies that we're talking about could have profound impacts. And so I'll leave it there, but happy to talk in depth about any sector or industry.
Ryan and Rebecca, 30 seconds each as we wrap things up, and then I'll let the chairman take us home.
Very quickly, I want to make sure that we understand that you don't have to be a computer scientist to do this. I was a journalist. I trained in journalism, and the newest thing that they're talking about is prompt engineering. Guess what prompt engineering is? It's not an engineering job. It's asking a good question. That's all it is. So using those critical thinking skills and using all this free training that we have available, you too can become an expert in generative AI.
Our CEO, Kevin Scott, thinks that this technology could be the great equalizer. He's someone who grew up in rural Virginia, an area that has been decimated economically by the textile industry, among others, going overseas and disappearing. And this sort of technology could enable everyone, no matter your education level, no matter your technical expertise, to make more use of computers to improve the efficiency in everything you do in your business and daily life. And we at Microsoft are very optimistic about that future.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
And for us, we just want to make sure that, again, we continue to make Texas #1, specifically in artificial intelligence, data centers, and all things technology related. So we're going to start early next year in January, start asking all of you and other stakeholders that were part of the privacy conversations and cybersecurity conversations to start giving us ideas, start working on models and frameworks for the next session, and then we'll soon have our stakeholder meetings and invite everybody to have probably the world's largest roundtable and conversations about artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our panelists. This was a great panel. Let's give them a nice round of applause, please.